Do you remember that one movie? It didn't exactly fall into the category of Disney Channel original movie as far as nostalgia. However, a lot of people could remember it as that one movie that Disney made that didn't quite get the reviews that they had hoped. Here at Film Study, I like to look back at some of these films, or new ones, and dissect it in terms of what went wrong or how people reacted to it. Given that this film has an overall score of 4.1 out of 5 stars, but speaking in terms of IMDb, which gave it 6.1 out of 10 rating, when going through these reviews, it actually makes sense as to why this film didn't perform well during its release in 1999. A lot of people compared it to a Simpsons episode, and IMDb user Movie Addict 2016 said it best. This aired on Disney a few years back as one of their infamous original movies. The concept is something from a Simpsons Halloween episode. A computer is won by a family and they move in only to find their lives dominated by a glitch in the system. Overall, this is not really worth your time as it is something The Simpsons managed to do in 30 minutes. And they're right, the abilities that the Ultra House 3000 has is listed as general household chores, cleaning, butler valet, opening and closing doors, pouring drinks, giving back rubs, cooking, serving food, after meal wash up, and social interaction. Obviously, in a more fleshed out movie, Pat, as we call her, is more hands-on, going as far as pricking your finger and figuring out that person's health history. Even another IMDb user stating, "It's not a bad movie, the story's interesting, the acting is alright. It's got a lot of things in it that are unrealistic, but that doesn't make it bad." However, that isn't entirely true. The story isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't mean it's good. In order to have a good story to tell, it must be told correctly. So let's go into each act of this film and figure out what worked and what went wrong. We enter at a scene that is kinda obvious that it was made to be an attention grabber. A newspaper boy comes riding along throwing newspapers in people's yards without a single care as to where it lands. Then an electronic hand comes out and Pat voices her opinion. Looking back at this now, it reminds me a lot of what we already have now, but we call it Alexa, telling the temperature and communicating to those who talk to her. Act 1 of any film consists of the introduction and characters and their lives before they change. Ben, the teenage son, tries to be the man of the house to his little sister as there is no apparent mother figure in the home. Cooking, cleaning, helping with homework, a good introduction. The classic family snowball of dad is feeling alone and the oldest doesn't quite understand that. It's cliche even though many people could have related to this a long time ago, and still can. It didn't grab a lot of people's attention to begin with and overall wasn't the point of the story. As much as we thought we'd be as advanced in the future now, based on this house, there are some things that we technically still don't have, like Pat determining the winner of said house, and this is where we get introduced to realism within the story. If you can picture a competition, any competition for that matter, being able to win a technology advanced house that people built and spent so much money building and maintaining just to throw it to another family seems extremely unrealistic, and like who would do that anyway? Because this film isn't animated and takes place in a realistic setting, it's hard to follow in terms of believing this could happen. There was also no real hook within the story. It's apparent that they tried to make the house itself be the difference and attention grabber. However, because it wasn't told right, it didn't work. And even if it did work, further into the story, it can start to lose people's attention. When we enter the house, Angie is pricked and Sarah explained that it is for Pat, the personal applied technology, to understand the people within the home as far as their health history and needs. Today, this would actually be creepy. The kitchen tour was pointed out to many viewers as one not being so realistic. Pat automatically knows what eating patterns Ben and Angie go by just by them breathing. Think about that for a second. Just by standing there, the technology of the house knows what you should and shouldn't eat and what your blood sugar levels are. I give the writers credit for the detail within the making of the house, but maybe they went too above and beyond creativity. At this point, it seems like nothing could go wrong. The premise, the base of the argument, is the technology of the house tries to be the boss and ruler of the new family. The climax begins during the banana-orange smoothie catastrophe. Ben takes it into his own hands, breaks into the control room, and attempts to reprogram Pat into being a mother to avoid his father pairing up with another woman. Pat becomes even more strict when a party gone wrong gets her yelled at by Ben's father, and then comes the climax. Now, before we get into Act 3, I wanted to stop and retrace our steps on the reviews of this story now that we've come this far, with many people calling it bland and a good concept with a bad execution. Rewatching this film all these years later, I can see why. Even with as short as this movie runs, it still moves slow with no real dramatization. Characters must have an I want or I need. Ben wants a smart house, now he's got it. He wants his dad to stay single, but he's not really fighting for it, thus not giving the audience enough of a reason to care for his goal. Now if that fails, the whole thing fails, which is kinda what we're looking at here. This is where I begin to state that Pat knuckles down on everyone in the home a little too much, assuming Angie is sick, forcing Ben to go to bed, and not allowing the father to make a call. It's not until the last 15 minutes of the film that things really start to get interesting. Even with being shut down, she somehow is able to override the system and create a real-life prototype of herself, with no explanation as to how, barging into Ben's room and completely going off about why she should be the only person for that family. It all just seems too forced and upfront and not believable, and everything is solved within minutes. The key point to this film was not a technology advanced house going AWire, but a technology advanced house trying to step in as a mother. The worst possible thing that could be done with the story as well is resolving a conflict with dialogue, and that's exactly what happens. And just like that, she disappears and everything goes back to normal. There are many different ways this story could have been told in a better way, more detail and more action within the characters. The idea of Pat coming to life was good, but wasn't much involvement with that version of her, and I feel like there was real potential for this film, but it just wasn't thought out enough. How do you think this story should have been told?